Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to share today's episode with you. It's with Julie Johnson, the founder of Integrate Network, which is an interdisciplinary network of trauma-informed providers, plus it's an awesome educational resource. And in our conversation today, we will be drilling down on the principles of trauma-informed Yin Yoga, and I think you'll come away with lots of practical tips and food for thought. Before we jump in, I do want to mention that my next level 1 Yin Yoga training is coming right up. It starts October 2nd, and it's an online training that combines the best of live stream group meetings and interaction with some self-paced homework and readings and videos that you do on your own time at home. So we meet on Zoom for 4 Saturday mornings in the fall. We're not on Zoom all day on any of those days. And it's spaced out over 2 months. So you really have the time to digest, and it's quite a sane schedule. Last spring, we had people from 5 or 6 different time zones, which was amazing. So you can join us from wherever you are. You can check out the details at movedtomeditate.yoga/trainings. And we start October 2nd, so check soon. The last note on this is that previous grads who've taken my Yin trainings before can retake the training for 50% off. I'm offering this because I think some of you might want to experience the training again and go through this material at a slower pace in this expanded online format. We used to do it in a single weekend at a studio. But now that we're in this post-COVID world and we're all online, we have some luxury of time to space things out. So it feels a little bit different, and I'm always adding new details and updated info. So you're welcome to join us again if you've taken it before, and just email me for the 50% off discount. The email is mail@movedtomeditate.com. And the website where you can check out details on the training is movedtomeditate.yoga/trainings. Okay, here we go into the conversation. Okay, welcome. Hey, everybody. So I'm here today with Julie Johnson. Thank you, Julie, for being here. Julie is a Yin Yoga teacher, an access and inclusion specialist, and an educator in St. Louis, Missouri. And we're going to talk today about Yin Yoga and trauma-informed practices and just lots of good stuff. So, Julie, do you want to just start by telling us a little bit more about your background and what you do professionally and how it relates to your yoga life?
Yeah. So, again, I'm Julie Johnson. I like to start off first by, because we talk about trauma. So like I do identify as a trauma survivor. So I think that kind of is like a good baseline to just kind of some of these things that we're talking about impact me personally and professionally. And then I also have a background professionally in education. So I have a background in we call it adaptive populations. The term special ed, but that term is becoming a little bit outdated. So I say adaptive populations. We're retiring the term. we are retiring the term. It's slowly becoming retired. It'll be about 5 years, I think, before all the systems get to it, but it's definitely slowly getting retired. So I call it adaptive populations. The term special, anyway, that's a whole other thing. But anyway, so we're retiring that. So adaptive populations, I also have several certifications in curriculum design and instruction around inclusion and accessibility. And in the school system, I work as a accessibility consultant and instructor around creating inclusive spaces and offering inclusive literacy based instruction for people with low incidence disabilities.
That's amazing. And you're in the St. Louis area. How long have you been
Mm-hmm.
there? And what schools do you work with? What's the environment like there?
So I work in. So I've been here for. So we've been here for almost 2000. Yeah, it's almost 11 years. That's shocking. We were in Seattle before that, where you are, and or not. You're not in Seattle, but we are in
In
Washington.
Washington.
Yeah, we were in Washington.
Not far.
We went to St. Louis, um, and I was teaching up there too in Edmonds, Missouri. Edmonds, Washington. Sorry, Edmonds, Washington. And then anyway. So here in St. Louis, I work with a lot of in several under resourced communities. Um, and um, you know, so I work with several different. So I work for a co-op and I work with several school districts around with on as an employee of the co-op, and we work around concepts of accessibility, making instruction inclusive to students with low incidence disabilities, um, and making environments inclusive. And I do this a lot through like universal design, kind of looking at a space and an instructional style and how we lead, how we teach, and how the environment impacts instruction. Okay, and I don't think that's often talked about very often. And
Mhm.
so, and then I also look at how technology can help be a barrier, help break, kind of minimize barriers in those spaces. And so it's funny. So what does this have to do with trauma informed yoga? So like the thing about trauma is I think in the circles that Addie and I are in, we talk about social justice a lot. And like especially in the yoga community, everything was about social justice and trauma informed, and then like it was about accessibility. And I'm like sitting here with my curriculum design and my educator hat on, and I'm looking at kids that are traumatized every day, and I'm looking at students that are traumatized and have learning disabilities or have other sensory impairments, and I'm like, so these things need to go together. You know what I mean? These aren't two separate things. These are like things we have to consider in our spaces. And I think that's the curriculum designer in me. We
Mhm.
have to link the things together, right? And so accessibility and trauma informed, like they're kind of two edges of the same thing. So we need to make spaces accessible, psychologically accessible to
Mhm.
people with PTSD, right?
Mhm.
And really that's just being a good human. And what does that mean for yoga? Well, yoga's a space and we need to create those spaces too. So like I've just kind of integrate, and like what I do in my yoga as a yoga teacher, I've taken all of the skills I do in the classroom and in the school system, and I just like reapply them to my yoga teachings.
I love that. I think that is pretty cool because, the terms trauma informed have become much more, a part of the yoga conversation in the last several years, which is wonderful and, really important. But you have like this professional background in this like larger context for how this
Mm-hmm.
all fits together. And, I think that's really helpful to take some of what you know from the education world and apply that within yoga spaces. So that's really cool. And, I just want to kind of go back to the basics of like, why do we need trauma informed yoga? Like, what is that?
Right.
And is that different than mainstream yoga or not trauma informed yoga? Like, what do you think about that?
I just wrote this in a curriculum actually for the studio I work at for their yoga teacher training. So it's fresh out of my mind. So, yoga is about bridging the two things together. So in the school system, I talk about universal design, creating spaces that are accessible and available to anyone, right? And that's really what yoga is about.
Hmm.
Yoking concepts together that are available to any person, right? That's what we're doing in yoga. Rather, I mean, on a very, very basic level, So I
Hmm.
just want to combine those two together. So we're yoking, right? So
Hmm.
I guess for me, knowing that's my baseline. When I started to hear trauma informed yoga as a survivor, I was like, oh, there's yoga that's psychologically sound to me, but but does that mean that I don't get the other yoga? This is like how this is how I think. And so then I've been in this space for like since 2013 through my own healing process and my own professional kind of looking at this kind of through the pedagogy perspective. And I'm like, I really feel like trauma informed yoga has it really does. It starts off at a good baseline. The way that we do it right now, yes, we need to do that, but we need to look at it in the wider lens of
Mhm.
why do we have to have trauma informed yoga and what's going on in the environment of the tradition of yoga that we had to go break away. And we need to tell that story.
Mhm.
That story has to be known. And that's why trauma informed matters. But trauma informed also has to come in and yoke back with the philosophy. Otherwise, we're just appropriating, we're doing the things that we are trying to not do in social justice and yoga. If we strip all of it away and we're like, we're just going to focus on breath and movement and we're not even going to talk about eight limbs,
Mhm.
then we're doing the very harm that we're trying to, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That traumatizes.
ironically, we would be undoing the intention we had in the first place. And you bring up a lot of good points about, some of the ways that yoga has been taught over time, and in the West in particular, like these kind of like hierarchical models, and some of the things that have happened with scandals where information came out that there was abuse and it was covered up, and all of these different things that have hit different yoga communities. It puts some people off from identifying with any of those lineages and traditions, and then we risk like losing the connection to where yoga comes from
Mhm.
and like the roots of it and the philosophies, like you said. So it's a really tricky path to navigate.
Yeah. And and I think the way when I wrote the curriculum for Joy of Yoga where I teach, the way that I wrote their trauma informed yoga chapter, their training, was I was like, we have to be able to do two things. One, we have to be able to take the philosophy and say, okay, why is it, where is it, where we misinterpreted something, or where someone misinterpreted something and caused harm,
Hmm.
okay, or caused trauma. And where can we look at neuroscience, okay, to find some upgrades in our understanding of the sutras,
Hmm.
right? Like I think that because if we look at a tradition and we're like, this is all we ever need to know, then we're just, you know what I mean? Then we're no better than the cat. Sorry, if anyone's Catholic. Anyway, then we're no better than
It raises my red
some
flags about fundamentalism too, because I
yeah,
grew up
that's
around that,
fundamentalism.
and that's like that one right way thing really gets my red flags going.
Yeah, so if we look at yoga like that too, and even trauma informed yoga, because there's some people that do have trauma. If with anything, if we look at it in those ways of it's just this is the tradition and that's all that there is,
Hmm.
then um, we risk being able to evolve as people, in our understanding
Exactly.
of consciousness. And so we can. So the way that I wrote it in the Joy of Yoga curriculum is the way we can do this is by looking at the koshas. Like take your understanding of the nervous system, like the kosha, and put it back into mine's the koshas and the chakras. I like to read note. I like to take what I've learned from Bessel van der Kolk and these other, people that have helped kind of be the leaders in um trauma
The
healing.
trauma
And I
field.
like to link the trauma field and link it back to, well, what about the koshas? They're saying the same thing. The
Hmm.
chakras, they're saying the same thing. Those are just two that I use a lot. I'm sure there's more examples. Oh,
Totally.
the yamas and niyamas.
Like this wisdom's
Those
already there in the yoga tradition, and we're kind of like bridging it with what these contemporary psychologists and scientists are also saying.
and that's what I said. I said the yogis already knew this on a very basic level, right?
Hmm.
It's just that Bessel and these other people, these other, doctors and scientists, they got it. They got this information from clinical studies. but it's essentially the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's yoking parts of ourselves from within back together after there has been harm, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, and it's that yoking, and it's remembering who we are
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what's happened to us and that we're already whole. All of those things say the same thing.
I
All
love
of those
it.
models
Yeah,
say
that's
the
like
same
the
thing.
reconnection and the yoking that is yoga. Um,
That's what yokes is. So anyway,
I
yeah.
love that. I think that's beautiful. Something else I wanted to ask you, and I think this is like a point where people get a little confused, and I'm curious what you would say about this, but sometimes people are a little bit like nervous about trauma informed yoga or that label because they feel like it's just going to be heavy or it's just going to be like all about trauma. And what I found is there's a difference between trauma informed and trauma focused. And I wonder
Right.
if you could speak to that and if that's like something you think about in your teaching, or what you would just say to someone who's like, oh no, this trauma informed class is going to be really heavy.
Yeah. So I think that's a big thing because in integrate, we've tried. But when Victoria was doing a lot of the branding with me, we definitely had to like go down that field of like what words are we going to use? Trauma which? Trauma focused? Aware? What do we use? You know? And we went down that bandwagon and we just confused ourselves even more. So it's a scary rabbit hole to go down. Like I was like, it's like it's one of those ones where like I'm just gonna leave that for when I need to leave it. It's hard to it's one that's hard to think on too much. But I think for me, trauma informed yoga is we are I like the term trauma informed. Ironically, I came to that conclusion actually after trying to get away from it like 3 or 4 years ago. I was like, I never want to use that term. Let's use like healing center and these other things. And I was like, I actually proved myself wrong. I actually don't like that. And I think trauma informed is helpful because there's an aspect of trauma informed care where the informing part needs to become the focus. What are you informing? I like to do informing. It's not information that you receive, it's information you're giving. And if
Mm,
we focus more on the information that you are giving out to people, ask yourself when I am teaching a trauma informed class, what information am I putting out into the world? Okay. Yes, you might be something you've received, but when you inform people of new ways of being in the world,
mhm,
you're creating new pathways for them and new ways for them to see themselves. So I think we focus too much on the trauma piece in that
mhm.
concept and more and less on the informed. I'm like, well, what does informed mean to you? What is how we thought about what informed means? I spend a lot of time on the informed part, obviously, because we spend so much time on the trauma part that I'm like, but let's talk about informed. How does it feel? Like I know this for me. Like, how does I feel so good when someone informs me of my boundaries in a space, their boundaries in a space. I'm informed, clear as kind. I'm informed. Okay. I'm informed on what the rules are. That's a trauma informed practice, by the way. Being,
Mhm,
being transparent. So so it's that information sharing. What kind of
mhm,
information are you sharing? And is it information that helps heal, that can help move people towards healing? Or is it moving people into, a different area away from themselves and onto you? You want to
right,
bring people back to themselves
right.
with the information you're putting out. Does that make sense?
It does, and, like, in sharing information is sharing power, and
Right.
the whole intention in holding space in a trauma-informed way is to give people their power back and their
Right.
choice back, and it's not that you're teaching them about trauma. You're not teaching them
No,
like stuff about trauma. You're just teaching them skills that are relevant and appropriate for human beings who've had certain
you're
experiences.
Well, and that's the informed part. I think that's the educator in me. I'm like, well, what
Hmm.
information are we giving here? Information, when we're saying trauma informed people, we're talking about information. That's my jam. What are we doing? I'm like, I think that's why my head always went straight to the information part and kind of skipped over to the trauma part. I'm like, okay, I understand trauma. Okay, but what information are we saying about that trauma? What's the through line on that? So I think we need to start talking about the information we're what are we saying about the people that are in our classes? What information are we giving them about who they are,
Hmm.
right? Because if you're giving information about that's a projection of you, that's not trauma. That's not informing. That's a projection, you
Right.
know? So
Right.
anyway.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And it's, and there's aspects of it that are just about being informed yourself as a teacher stepping into that room,
Mhm.
so that you can be aware of how you carry yourself and the language you use and the things that you offer and the information you offer, that it would be relevant and appropriate, like I said before, to the group. And we would want to
Right.
do that with any group of humans, regardless of what it was we were, doing or teaching or leading or who they might be.
Yeah, and I think you said something earlier about, you know, with that knowledge you have, that information you've gained from whatever personal healing trainings, whatever. Um, when you can inform, let me tell you, like I was like, I just think about my students a lot, and if nobody else told them, because like, and many of our students that you don't know the prison that people have built for themselves, and a lot of people, if you don't tell them that they are free to do things with their body is, they don't know. They
Hmm.
don't know because that's not how our society works. But when you inform someone with a cue,
Hmm.
you're free to do what you want to do. You're informing,
Yeah.
okay? And that's like what trauma informed yoga is. It's the informing of liberation, right?
Informing of liberation. That's it.
Yeah,
I love it.
that's it.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that could be, like you said, setting the expectations or telling people what the rules are in the space, like letting people know at the beginning of class, like if you need to go to the restroom, it's okay to just get up and go. Otherwise,
Right.
there will be people who will dither for the whole class, even though they have to pee, and they're like, "I don't know if I can get up. Is it okay? Will I be interrupting? Will the teacher get mad at me?" Yada, yada,
Mhm.
yada, because we need people to, like, give us that permission to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people in that early spaces of trauma healing and just in general sense of self in general, I don't think it's exclusive to trauma. I think people do need to sometimes get that permission. Oh, they need that power to be given back to them with the information that
Mhm.
you're the information giver, that you have the power and the choice to make those decisions for yourself. You know, so in many ways, trauma informed yoga teachers are, they're the information of liberation, which is cool.
I love that, and yoga is a path to liberation. So,
Right.
that's the essence, right? Um,
Yeah, that's it.
Let's talk more about yin yoga specifically
Okay.
and how yin can be an effective trauma recovery practice, self healing practice, and why you particularly like to focus on yin yoga.
Yeah. So, for me, yin, I think for me, yin is it's very powerful because it asks us to do two things. It asks us to slow down and to also keep our bodies engaged. That's what I always tell people. I'm like, because it's not restorative yoga, and it's asking us to keep in most shapes our muscles can still be engaged. Now you can, our muscular dynamic, our skeletal system is can be engaged still, right? So we're asked, so we're not going into a restful restorative state. I just like to say that because I think there needs to be a real understanding that yin is not restorative yoga, and that's like a whole other thing, right?
It's a
But our
little more
muscles
yang
are
than restorative
it,
yoga, ironically.
it it is. I know. That's why I was like, yeah, thanks for bringing the yang in there because I was like, yeah, it's like our muscles are still engaged in most of the shapes, right? A good chunk of them. And so it's like the one practice I've seen where you are asked, you're invited to slow down and notice your body and feel your body in all these different shapes. Um, and knowing you're not stuck, of course, that takes the informed part of an instructor to tell you that. But to inform you that you are not stuck, like that comes from history too, because sometimes you can feel like that if you have certain teachers. But
Yeah.
but um, but anyway, so I think that's the really powerful, beautiful part of it. So you're asked to kind of slow down, and then you can get into the nervous system. You can start to go into the nervous system exploration when you slow down, feel sensation in the body, or the shape your body is in if sensation is not available to you. So you can go to all these different layers of awareness,
Mhm.
from exteroception, or we call the external world, what shape your body is in, proprioception, and then if it's available, interoception.
Mhm.
What's it feel like inside of my body? And we can do that by slowing down, right? I mean, maybe some people can do it by speeding up. I'm just not one of those people.
Well, it's so profound to slow down because that's like the opposite of what for the most part, our society is encouraging us to do.
Right.
So it's it's a big deal to slow down, and not always easy, but it is quite a profound practice just to
Well,
do that.
and it asks you to also feel too. So it's
Hmm.
asking you to slow down and not disconnect. It's asking you to slow down and feel.
Hmm.
And I think that's really profound.
I do too. And not easy. And that can
No.
be really especially challenging for someone who carries a history of trauma. So I wonder, I know you've told me about sometimes you've received pushback about the use of yin yoga for trauma survivors.
Mhm.
And like if it's around that challenge of slowing down and feeling when you have trauma, or if it's something else, like what's that about when you've heard people say that yin yoga is not appropriate for trauma?
Well, going back to trauma informed yoga and some of its pitfalls, or the ways that it's been interpreted. Let's put it that way. Is I think that there has been a misinterpretation that trauma survivors cannot be still.
Mm,
Okay, and that they can only there's been a misinterpretation of this, I think, by some leaders in the field, and so where they should be moving, and and they sense empowerment through movement, and I think that's where I got some pushback, thinking that if trauma survivors are still, then the trauma survivors can't be still because they need movement, and like well, that's maybe some one a type of body that might need something more, not even type of body, just a stage someone's in their healing process, you
mhm.
know, might need, I mean, or a day. I mean, I'm like that too, I can go from a yin practice one day to, kickboxing and like punching a punching bag the next day. So like, take whatever, so I think that we need to not put I think that the pushback is we need to not put trauma survivors in a box
Yeah.
of what trauma informed yoga is appropriate, or what kind of yoga is appropriate for them. Some people love Kundalini. Like they love it. They have had great success from it. I have personally been traumatized from Kundalini, but like, hey, you
And
know
that's
what?
all movement.
Like, right. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. I love that people have found great healing from their trauma through Kundalini. Like, that is awesome. But
Mhm.
I think we need to stop I think the pushback has been saying these statements like, trauma survivors can only do like slow flows. You know what I mean? Or like Ashtanga. You know what I mean? Like some people like, not like Ashtanga though, but like there is like a big, large part of some parts of trauma informed yoga sequences that come from Ashtanga,
Yeah.
because it's repetitive. It doesn't change. It's pretty predictable,
Mhm.
so that a lot of people kind of go to Ashtanga. They are learning how to build a sequence like that. But I think that's where I got my pushback. Does that make sense? Sorry
That
to.
does make sense. And I mean, I think absolutely there's instances where active mobilization is what is needed, or like discharge of
Mhm.
energy is what is needed, and doing like a familiar ashtanga routine that's really active, that could be like brilliant, but that's not
Right.
all cases for all people at all times. So like why would we want to go and put even more limitations on trauma survivors and like scare them away from stillness
Well, and
or practices that could be really beneficial.
yeah, and I think we also set up a narrative too when we do those things for trauma survivors. We set up a narrative of, I think, infantilization
Hmm.
of, like, you can't handle being still. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but like, I mean, myself, including a lot of people, like people have been through a lot of things, and at least for me, Yin Yoga promised for me like a space where I could learn to release a lot of the things. I could have space like the ground. I know we'll talk about this later, but like the ground is a resource. How many times have I posted just lay on the ground? And it's like one
Yeah.
of the top, I mean, it's like shared like 50 times. Like on every time I say something like lay on the ground and breathe, like as an affirmation on integrate, like which is pretty much what you're doing
And yin.
in yin and some in yin is is like that's profound. Like I mean I wish one of my I wish I would have thought of doing that, before I was in a yin class. I'm like just lay on the ground and breathe, okay? And I
Yeah.
just don't think like trauma survivors, a lot of them have been overacting and over lots of, I'm not saying everyone, but some people go into hypervigilant mode, especially those of us that can
Hmm.
kind of go in that hypervigilant state. At least for me, I'll speak personally, like for me, I fall into the category of trauma response where, I keep moving and moving and moving and moving. And I'll take on things and I'll take on things and
Hmm.
I'll carry the weight of the burden. I'll take on too much responsibility, like emotionally for other people's things, whatever. Just whatever. I'll take too much responsibility, whatever that means. And then Yin's like, hey, release that. Okay, is it okay to cuss?
It's supposed to be clean on Apple, so
Clean. Got it. Got it. Got it. I got it. Okay. Release that stuff on the floor. That's why I asked. And
that's
so that stuff on the floor. Okay, cool. And release that stuff, into the ground.
hmm
And so I think that that's really profound, to think about that, to be like, oh, I can release. I don't have to carry. And sometimes for me, when I'm
Yeah.
overly mobile, I tend to feel that I'm carrying too much. I'm carrying the things.
That makes sense to me, and, like, I can see myself in that pattern of, kind of, like, keeping too busy in order to kind of avoid having to sit with something, and, not to super oversimplify people's experiences at all, but I can see it in myself. And then I'll get in bed and I'm like, oh my God, I'm still and I can't sleep and everything's coming up because that's like the one moment I've allowed myself to be still. So I
Yeah.
need a practice to help me like be with things and let them come up and to realize, oh, it's not that scary. I can handle it.
Yeah. And I think that that's where, yin is really great from a trauma informed perspective is it teaches you to slow down, it allows you space to feel where you're holding tension in the body. Feeling allows you permission to explore what does even sensation even mean in the body.
Hmm.
And you can just explore all these different, mindfulness techniques as well while you're in a yin space, and I think that that's where it's cool because you can blend the yin and the mindfulness pieces together.
Yeah, which is really, really important, that we're not just going into a pose and then like waiting for ourselves to get flooded with everything that comes up, but we're actually cultivating mindfulness and developing skills for how to be with things. So that is a crucial point, which leads me into something I wanted to really dig into with you. Is you have this great chart that you made that's called the principles of trauma sensitive yin and mindfulness, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. You've shared it on Instagram and I'll link to it as well so people can really look at this. um, and it's got like four columns, and the first column is about anchors of awareness. An anchor of awareness is like where we put our attention, right? And so let's talk
Mhm.
about a few of these anchors of awareness in a trauma sensitive yin, mindful yin practice. I noticed, so you've got the five senses orienting in the direction of the ground, sitting against a wall, sound, and natural breathing. And I noticed that a few of those are like external, like something outside of us, like the floor or a wall or hearing a sound, which is really interesting, as opposed to something like a sensation internally. And can you talk a little bit
Mhm.
about like why we have the option of both and either?
Yeah. So I think so. There's two things. I think that I think when people come into stillness, they can also practice where they're going to put their attention. And if we're just like, I'm just going to focus on my breath for the next 5 minutes, let's just say you're in a yin class where that's happening, because that happens. Like, I think that giving yourself permission to have choices on where you intentionally put your mind can be really powerful, right? So what if I did intentionally put my mind, this is what I do in these situations. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to listen for the cars outside the window. Okay? For like 3 breaths. And then after 3 breaths, I'm then going to shift my attention to feeling my forehead on the ground.
Mm.
Right? So it's kind of practicing dharana too in yoga. Dharana just means concentration.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to concentrate on these different levels. So, and they're not, and they're both, one is external, because that might be where I'm at in my understanding. Feeling my body while I'm still might be, there might be that might be a lot of just too many senses.
Mm-hmm.
But I can listen for something out external, or you look at something that's farther away from me, turn my head and look if that's available to you. Look beyond, or listen for something out beyond you while I'm still. Like, that's still important because it also orients you to right now.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that orients you to right now, right? So whether it's feeling what's inside of me right now, listening to the sounds happening around me, whatever.
It's
Like, all of
grounding us
that
in the
is
present.
mindfulness. It's
Exactly.
all grounding us in the present moment.
Yeah, exactly. Which could happen through any of our senses. And,
Hmm.
our body and our hearing and our eyes, and this is all in the present moment, unlike our thoughts a lot of the time, which
Hmm.
are in the past or in the future. So that's really helpful to have those options. And I like the way you talked about kind of cycling your attention through different anchors. I like to do that when I do walking meditation. Sometimes I'll do like one trip down my little path, feeling my feet, and then I'll come back and it'll be like seeing, and what can I see? And then
Hmm.
the next one, it'll be hearing. What do I hear? So, yeah, shifting around the anchor can be really helpful. And especially
Hmm.
if there's something about feeling in the body or being with the breath that's like provoking of anxiety, or like it's bringing up something that is challenging and it's kind of disorienting. So it's good to have those options.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that knowing when people, like for me, when I start to go into overwhelm about something, it's kind of powerful to be like, oh, I can not focus on this for a while and think about the ground.
Hmm.
Just gonna think about the ground for a while. You know what I mean? Like, and that takes practice, I realize, you know what I mean? But like,
Yeah.
but it's nice to know that you're, just because a thought comes up doesn't mean you have to sit in, and it doesn't become the object of your attention, right?
Yeah.
You can shift the attention around just other things in you that are physically in the present moment, and put the thought in the I call it, put it in the box and come back to it later, right? So I always tell people, I'm like, put it in the box and come back to it and listen or feel, or whatever, breathe. So I think that it's cool to know that you have attention, you have freedom and empowerment, power choice making on where you put your attention. I know that doesn't sound radical to anyone by the yoga world, but it's pretty radical
No,
from a
I
trauma
think
survivor
I
perspective.
think that's huge. And when you talk about informed and, trauma informed and informing students, like actually informing someone that they have choice about where they place their
Yeah,
attention is huge. And,
huge.
we might, maybe we've heard that, but like just to practice it and have a space where we can actually apply that and grow that ability, that's huge.
Hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because I mean, for anyone that has obsessive or intrusive thoughts, like to be like, oh, like I realize not everyone is at this level of understanding, but to know that, hey, the intrusive thought comes, I don't have to sit and think and obsess over the intrusive thought. I can go put it in the box, is what I call it. Go put it in the box, lock it away, whatever you need to do with it later. If you need to wait till you're at a therapist's office to like process it, but go put it in the box.
Hmm.
you know, do what you need to do with it later.
Yeah. Let it be in the background at least, and put
Hmm.
something else in your attention.
Right.
And I like how
Exactly.
you talked about the the ground and like a wall and things that are like solid that you can feel and touch.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
do you like when you teach a yin class, do you try to have people near a wall if they have access to like something solid, or do you call attention to the ground and the floor? Like, how does that weave into your teaching?
Yeah, so I start out every class asking people to if they want to sit. I start out my classes the same way all the time. But it really helps people. People really like that I start my class out the
Yeah,
same
it's
way all the
good.
time. It's really routine. Yeah. I mean, I differentiate it a little bit, but I do stay pretty consistent. But like, so I ask, so I say if they want to start out in an upright position, they can put their back against the wall, or they can lie down on the ground. So either way, if they or they can sit upright and just be in an upright, more traditional stance. But I give those three options for grounding. So they can either lay on the ground, they can sit against the wall, or they can sit upright. Really, the only thing I care about is that you're lengthening in the spine. Rather, it doesn't matter. You can still lengthen and be supported by the ground. You know, you can still lengthen and be, on the wall. And I don't know why people don't know that or why we forgot that. Anyway, but you can lengthen anywhere. Like, I'm not sure why people think that you can't do that. I'm like, you can still lengthen and still be supported by the wall. You can. You
Yeah.
can literally.
And
And
it's
so,
like got our
and I,
back, it's so nice
right.
and it's supportive.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of things about like people's ideas of what meditation postures are supposed to be that they're like, I've got to hold myself up and I got to sit in lotus and it's got to be like, I don't know, this whole
Yeah.
thing.
Well, I mean, I did a cue. So you asked me how I embed it. So like, I can't tell you how many times someone will come in with a traditional yoga student, and I say, who's been meditating forever, they sit in their traditional stance, and I'll say, hey, if it feels good to your body, maybe go put your sacrum against the wall, but still stay extended in the spine, so you're not, so you still have the meditative positioning. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna go do that. And then they do it and they feel really good. And I'm like, yeah, it feels really good to have your sacrum supported, but you're still traditional. Like, I don't want to like scrap the traditional stuff because that still
Yeah.
matters. Like, it still
Yeah.
matters to be lengthening in the spine and to have a, a posture of awareness, within your body for meditation. I
Hmm.
mean, for traditional, if you're going for that route, okay. I'm not saying you can't meditate if you're like that, but it's still good to have that body awareness of lengthening and openness just for proprioception at the very least. And I think people are really surprised when they're like, oh, my I do feel actually more centered and aware, because sometimes for me, if I, especially if it's at the end of the day and I go into a traditional meditation positioning, I feel the weight
Hmm.
of the day. And there's something about putting at least my sacrum on the back, so at least that part's supported, and maybe part of my shoulders, and still lengthening through the spine. There's I don't know, there's a lot of great a release there that happens, and I feel very supported and ironically more grounded, because
Hmm.
the walls behind me, the ground is beneath me, and I think because I'm kind of in that like contained space, my body is freer
Yeah.
to be expansive. Does that make sense? It's like an anchor.
Totally. It's like it gives you containment and sense of boundary, and it gives you feedback. You can feel, oh, that little back muscle is kind of tight, and you can maybe invite it to let go. It gives you information and it gives you support. And no one's saying you have to always do it this way, but it's like a nice option.
Right, it is, and it for my yin perspective, and from I think it also just helps people psychologically be like, I am supported.
Yeah.
I don't, I am supported on a very basic level. Even if the only thing I ever felt support with from today was the wall,
Mhm.
at least I know it's support. I have the experience of support somewhere in
Yeah.
my
I think
inner in my human experience.
it talks to your nervous system and
Hmm.
sometimes it's like intellectually we can know that we're safe and like this experience we had is over, but like our nervous system takes a long time to catch up with us sometimes, and so we have to like feed it these experiences of support and safety and like bring it along. So That leads us into
Totally.
the second column. On
Yeah.
your handout, I'm still going through the
We're
handout.
just we're just going right through it, right.
So see,
Yes.
you're a teacher. And I have a background in teaching, and being a lifelong student and being a geek. So I'm like, we're going to go bullet point by
Like a
bullet point.
teacher in like an educate. You were a teacher in the education system.
I No, not in the K through 12
Oh,
education
okay.
system, but I was like a graduate teaching assistant
Oh,
in
got ya.
like at a
Okay, there
university
you go.
level, and I like had to make up syllabi and
Oh yeah. So
lectures and
that's why we're friends.
yeah. See, so I'm on your wavelength.
You got it.
But
Yes.
so, second column is about the nervous system and the window of
Right.
tolerance and polyvagal theory. And, the part of it that I really want to pull out is that we're teaching students, we're experiencing as practitioners the ability to learn how to make empowered choices for the nervous system. That's your phrase,
Hmm.
empowered choices for the nervous system. So, can you
Hmm.
talk about that and like how we even get to know like how our nervous system is feeling and how to make choices to work with our nervous system?
Well, I think that right. So when I have to start talking about that, I usually frame it in my classes like, you have choices in life, right? And you can and empowered choices are the choices that we make that um put us closer to our put us back in touch with our wholeness, our connectedness, the yoking, right? Our some would say your divinity if you're getting into that realm. Um, so what are things are so the inquiry is, are the decisions that I'm making just simply here on the yoga mat, are they putting me closer to my um closer to healing, to this space of taking care of myself? Or am I moving into maybe a space, or not that it's good or bad, but or am I making a decision that may not be putting me, more at risk, okay, for harm, okay? And I put it at that, all right? And I think that when we kind of put it in that space, because you can be harmful too. Like sometimes if I get too far, like in a yoga, and even in a yin shape, like I'm like that wasn't a good choice. Like that was then I'm feeling it for like 4 days. You know, I'm like, that was not empowered choice making. I'm not really
Hmm.
sure what that was, but it was not
Hmm.
empowered choice making, you know? And I think we do that a lot in our lives. It's like it's some of these benign choices that seem benign on the mat actually were not really great, you know? And and I think it's okay to say we don't make good choices on the yoga mat sometimes. Like that's a thing. Like I do it all the time.
Okay,
Like
thanks. Please explore that, right?
that's what I mean. It's like a low risk, right?
Yep.
And so what is an empowered choice? And we kind of explore that. So is it doing that breath practice that's going to make me be anxious for like the next hour afterwards? Maybe not. Is it going to be maybe just doing shavasana while everyone else does another 10 sun salutations? Or maybe it's bringing a block in, or slowing the practice down. So all these things, slowness, props, doing your natural breathing. Those are all examples of how you can make an empowered choice for yourself on the mat. Because if you can make an empowered choice on the mat, you can start making these little choices for your life. Like today, I went and got, I didn't have a large time to go to the Whole Foods and get my juice like I wanted to. But so I had to go to the gas station and I was really hungry and I was going to be hangry. And I had to make an empowered choice at the gas station on gluten free food, which they don't have a lot of gluten free food there. So, like, I had to do the best I could, right?
Yep.
But it was an empowered choice. And I walked out with a hard boiled egg, some water, and grapes.
Good
So,
job.
when I could have had a hot
You could
dog
have
and
had
chips.
burritos.
Not that it's, not that there's anything wrong with it with hot dog and chips, but I do need energy in order to do a
Mhm.
presentation,
Yep.
you know? So I needed to find food that was going to be energizing. So that was an empowered choice for me at the gas station.
Yeah. Makes sense. That makes sense. And like linking it to the nervous system, I think like the slowness of the yin practice helps us to start to feel like we're in relationship with our nervous system, and we can start to feel like what it's like when we're activated and we're kind of revved up, or what it's like when we're actually calm and the breath is different. And yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing with the nervous system is that we're given this framework of the nervous system, right? With polyvagal theory and the window of connection or tolerance, asterisk window of connection is what I call it. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But I do call it that because it helps us like understand ourselves, on a deeper level. Anyway, but we're giving these frameworks, right? And like I think sometimes we have to be able to be like, what do these frameworks mean for me in my life functionally? And we can start the mat. So it's like, okay, if I put a block or if I sit against the wall, is that going to help me come closer into relationship, feeling safe with self? Okay. Sometimes it does. Like, I mean, sometimes for me, when I sit against the wall for a really long day, I'm like, oh, I do feel like I feel comforted and contained. And and the containment helps me energetically feel more attentive to self. Okay.
Mhm.
So just adding a block or just slowing the breath down, all of those are just things you can do to kind of just be safe with self, which is essentially what I think regulation is.
Mm. I like that. Regulation is being safe with self.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's, I mean,
Yeah.
and I think I came to that definition because I work in schools with a lot of high needs and I see kids that are not safe with themselves.
Yeah.
They aren't, or with others. And um, I'm trying to word this. And I think this isn't always true, but I'm always like, how can those kids feel safe with themselves? And I think that that's always a question. I bring that back to myself is, do I feel safe with self right now? Do I feel safe with myself?
Hmm.
How can I feel safe with myself right now? Right? Because I think sometimes with polyvagal theory, people get a little, I think some folks see that like, I don't feel safe with people. I'm like, well, we need to talk about safety with self too. It's not both and or either or, but but I do think it's a good starting place for yoga. Safe with self
Mhm.
on the mat. Right?
Mhm. Yeah, and giving the choice and the power back to the student and, not allowing that to be completely in the hands of the teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think so empowered choice making, to wrap that part up is just really making empowered choices that take us back to being safe with self,
Yeah.
and feeling regulated in the nervous system to find that space, however wide it is. Maybe it's a little corner of safety of feeling safe with self, but like at least a glimmer of safe with self.
And that's like such good practice. And the teacher, I think, helps with that by giving options, with as much clarity as
Hmm.
possible. But, letting people know they can meditate in a different posture, or they could breathe in a different way, or they could have their eyes open or closed. And some of these are on your
Hmm.
list. They can
Totally.
leave the yin pose early if they need to, even though they're long held poses and we're kind of like timing them for certain benefits, but that
Hmm.
sometimes the body says, "Hey, I want out." And,
Yeah.
it's okay to take a break. It's okay to come out early.
Totally.
That can be an empowered choice.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Those are knowing you're not stuck, those are all that's totally part of that.
I think that's where sometimes a yin class can get a little less trauma informed is when we get a little too much into the whole um being with things as they are, which is important, but getting a little bit rigid about that, where it's like we're going to lean into the discomfort and the way out is through, and we're just going to stay with this until the bell rings, and it gets like a little intense. And sometimes that's too much. Like that's a skill,
Yeah.
but sometimes that's too much.
Yeah, I practiced that in cycling today. I had a cycling instructor, great cycling instructor, but she's always like, stick with it even if it's hard. And I'm like, no, thank you. I'm going to taking my resistance back to 2. Ha! You know, go feel safe at 2
Because
because I can.
that was an empowered choice for you.
I do. No, that's what I'm saying. Like you learn it on the yoga mat, you take it to the cycle class, okay?
That's
And
right.
so because you can,
That's a
and I
radical
did.
thing to do sometimes. To do less can be radical. So
Right. And so I took, she was like, turn your intensity up to 12. And I was like, I'm going to take it down to 2 because my body is done.
yeah. And then you're connected enough to know that though. So you didn't just
Right.
automatically like obey the instruction. You like tuned in and you felt what was right. And on another day you might have been like, I'm going to 13, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's true. And so I think that like, so I just like to give examples of that because I think sometimes like when we're on the mat, it's like, what are we doing here? But like So when you practice those little bits of, of safety for yourself, you can they translate into other areas too. I didn't even know I started doing it in other workout classes until like one day I was like, I'm not going to do that. One day this was like at another gym, and I didn't do it, and I was like, that was great. Where did I learn that from? I was like, oh yeah, yoga. So just all of a sudden you just give yourself all this permission on the yoga mat, then you start giving yourself permission other places too.
That is
So like
awesome.
and you just don't even see it come. I mean, again, maybe some people do, but I didn't see it coming. I just started being like, I don't do that. And I was like, where did I learn that? you know because someone informed you of your permission, and when some days you just start taking the permission for yourself without the informing part, and your body is like, yeah, I can do that because you can.
That's awesome. I mean, that's such a big deal to be able to like make that choice for yourself and just to have that start happening automatically without it having to be like such a big, thought process. And yeah,
Yeah, and that's the practice part, right? So
exactly. Well, the last column is compassion focused. And this is really important to, just having the whole class under this, spirit of compassion and care. And the second bullet point on here is the one that really caught my attention the most, which is that a compassion focused class encourages a felt sense of presence over, quote, calming down, which is really interesting, right? Because, I mean, a lot of us would like to feel calmer and more relaxed, but it's not always helpful to be told to calm down or to relax, or that could even be really jarring. So
Mhm.
can you talk about like encouraging a felt sense of presence over placing a value on calming down?
Right. So like, what is calming down anyway? Um, so really, what is it? Because I don't know. No one's ever been able to explain it to me, and so no one, like no one's been able to really that has any permission to like give me a really good definition. No one really has a good like definition of what calming down means. No one, like there's no one that does that. But presence, okay, presence we can do, right? Presence, we know what that means. We know that that means paying attention to what's happening around us. We know that means mindfulness. I always like concrete because like that's what we know, right? That's why I was like, what does calm down even mean? No one knows what it means. And nobody. We just have an idea based off of like some like ableist perspective of what calm looks like.
Yeah.
But like, is it from a nervous system perspective? Are you are you like just like suppressing? That's where my head
Are
goes.
you just behaving in a way that people are more comfortable with, or is
Right? Are you just overly obedient? Like, what is this?
it
And
a response?
right, exactly. That's where my mind goes, and everyone's like, "Calm down." I'm like, "What does that actually really mean? Let's break that down more." Okay,
Mhm.
there you go. There's the educator B. I'm like, let's just make some more boxes and columns and
We
spread
need
that
more
calm
bullet
concept
points on
out.
that.
We need more bullet points. I'm gonna need some more infographics on that and some flow charts. Um, but I think for presence, I think we know what that is. We know what presence is. We know that there's a mindfulness component to it. It's learning what's present right now. What's present within me right now. Even if it's like high for a lot of energy, a lot of sensation, that's still presence, right? It may not be comfortable presence. It might be very, unpleasant presence, but it's presence nonetheless. And I think that that's what we're looking, and it's acceptance, right? That's what we're looking for. I feel like when we talk about this concept of calming down, I'm not. I have to wonder where acceptance is in the in whatever is happening. I'm like, are we accepting of what's happening? Like, I just have lots of questions about the concept of calming down,
Yeah.
obviously, but presence is like, okay, am I accepting of whatever is rousing me? Is there something that I'm not accepting? And that acceptance is not tolerant, by the way. I like to make sure I'm clear on that one. Acceptance is clarity. Have I found clarity, right, about it? And usually it's not if I'm quote unquote not calm. I'm not present with something. There's a lack of clarity, or maybe there's some confusion within my inner experience about what's happening. And so presence can help us on the path to clarity, if that's even a possibility, because sometimes it's not. But is there acceptance around it? And I think that when we create presence, we can kind of get closer on that path of acceptance to whatever the bigger picture is, whatever that is, and also maybe a little bit of clarity around what is happening within us.
I love that. And I think that's really helpful to make the distinction because, presence is, if we're teaching presence or we're learning presence, that's more inclusive of the whole range of our experience as humans,
Mhm.
not just the ones that we can be calm with, right? Because it's not always appropriate to be calm. Like we might need to like stand up for ourselves, or we might need to stand up for someone else, or be active in
Mhm.
a way, mobilized in a way that's not seen as calm, but we can be present with it. We can be clear with it, and I think that's important. And and also like in terms of the body, like we can't always tell it to calm down. Like maybe it's in pain and it can't stop being in pain, but we can be present with this whole
Mhm.
situation as it is without you know trying to like tell it to be otherwise.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things. It's learning to accept. I think what Yin Yoga tries to do. And I think that the intention is there, although there is harm in intention, 150%. Is that it's harmful, but I think they try to, in the creating of the space or being with whatever is, they're trying to create that acceptance by forcing it. But you
Hmm.
can't force acceptance. You can't. It's a step. It's a process. And I think that that's always the intention of those cues is if we're, you know, you have to feel it to heal it, which I used to like that term. And I know there's a lot of people that probably like it. That probably like it. There's nothing wrong with the term. I just like to give an asterisk to it if you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes we're not ready to feel it. And that doesn't mean we're not ready to heal it either. It just means that the feeling part may not be available. And I think that the presence piece though can be that next step of being present with whatever is there and learning to just name the things that are present, right? In that moment, even if it's just sensory based, right? We don't have to feel everything, but you can start to name the things that are coming up, even if it's like I hear the dryer on. I hear, I taste my coffee. I feel I notice my stomach is um there's warmth in my stomach or movements and sensations in the stomach. That's kind of the stepping stone. So I think there's this tendency to, I think, feel it to heal it. I didn't know I was gonna even go here anyway. I didn't even know I was like, I didn't even know I had a thing with it until it came up. I was like, I don't like that term. And I think that it became, I used to like it. I like backstep on things I used to like all the time. And that's one of them. I used to say that stuff. And I'm like, no, like maybe we don't have to feel it to heal it. Maybe we need to be present with it for like a while before we know how to feel it, right? And so maybe that is for some of us. Maybe that is just safer, you know. Um, and I think sometimes when we force people in, like in Yin, sometimes we force people into feeling sensation too much, and then we force that you have to feel it to heal it or be discomfortable to have something like some little asterisk like healing. I think it makes it linear and like we're going to have some carrot if we sit in our stuff for too long when it actually can actually be very harmful to do that.
Exactly. Well, and I think it's like there can be value in that approach or that statement, the feel it to heal it, like that can have value, but it has to be balanced with compassion. Like
Mm-hmm.
awareness and compassion have to be held together, and we have to be like checking both in order to like really be practicing this in a way that isn't going to take us off into trouble.
I think the feel it. I didn't even know I had an issue with feel it to heal it until like at least externally. I had it in my mind. I didn't even know I was going to go there, but I think it started. I started seeing it misused a lot because it became really what like I think Bessel van der Kolk says it in his book. I
Mm,
think, or someone says it. One of
mm.
them says it quite a bit, and I think that guy. It's like when Brene Brown says something, like it becomes very common and sometimes misconstrued, you know. And I think I started seeing it in some mindfulness classes, and people were like, just sit in it, just be with whatever comes up. And I think that that's anti nervous system. Like that's not how not how we work. in our neurobiology, and so I think to command it, we need to see something a little bit more skillful. I think we need more
Mhm.
skillful language around that. That's what I think on that. That's actually my thing. I think we need more skillful language beyond, we need to feel it to heal it, and also have some compassionate presence around the process.
Yeah. I think it's just an example of like being careful with language and like especially phrases like that that are so memorable because they can be taken to heart. They can be taken to heart a little bit too much and applied too much in maybe the
Yeah.
wrong moment for the person, you know? So it's like
Right.
maybe it is appropriate at times and maybe it doesn't apply to everyone all the time.
Right, exactly, exactly. We have evolved. When integrate's been around for almost 7 or 8 years, so like you start to hear yourself say things after a while. You're like, did I say that?
You're like,
And
I
that's
don't
on
know
public
that.
record.
You just hear
I'm
it in a
like,
different way and you keep
you
learning.
you hear, I know, and I'm like, I'm just gonna keep correcting myself on that one. I just keep
Totally.
not correcting, keep upgrading my understanding.
Totally. Well, speaking of Integrate, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Integrate network and also like where people can find and follow you and what you've
Yeah.
got going on?
Yeah, so Integrate was created in 2000, oh yeah, 2014. And so it was created when I was personally going through my own healing process. And I also was helping kind of establish uh this after school yoga program in this school system I was in. It since has transformed into other things and done other cool things and whatever, as those programs do. and and but I was kind of getting it established at a particular school in in St. Louis County, and as I was going through my own healing process, I started seeing my students didn't feel safe with salt either, and I was like, hey, how can we create like a network that I can like refer my students to, you know? And
Yeah.
so I started kind of getting a group of like professionals together around St. Louis that kind of ran from this more trauma informed care mentality, kind of more going for not calling DFS and doing more like whole person systems of care intersectionally. So, or not, interdisciplinary. So, doctors, social workers, anyone that worked with kids is where it started. And then I kind of went to the healing arts process. Started talking to more yoga teachers and chiropractors in the area. And we kind of created this list. It was really cool, and we created this really cool list that we like had to figure out how to manage, which has always been a work in progress. So we had this, and then we were like, hey, let's like have some panels. And we started having like panels around trauma informed care around 2015, 16, which feels like the old days at this point in time. And it really does. I was like, oh my god, that wasn't that long ago, but like it feels like 12 years ago. And then we became and then we started, and then Victoria moved out to Oakland. Victoria is the person that kind of helped found it, and we were like, okay, let's do it in Oakland and St. Louis, and let's like kind of build these networks. Let's like have these panels talking about building skills, and connecting other people to like other folks in their area that have that have histories of trauma that would like this kind of seek these kinds of professionals out.
Mm.
Um, and then so we did that for a long time with COVID in St. Louis, and we kind of had this network of really cool people connecting and doing the things. And then COVID happened, and then we were like, we're gonna have to go all online, which is something we'd been feeling since Victoria moved out to Oakland. And we were like, we don't have to though. We just really don't want to go there right now because like that's like a whole other thing. And so then we with COVID we canceled our conference and transitioned it into, I guess we transitioned into a self-paced online conference, which was no biggie. We like, made the switch in 6 weeks, no biggie. Anyway, actually, it was a huge deal. It was actually a very large
A lot of
undertaking.
work.
It was a lot of work. Don't take that was sarcasm. Like
Yeah,
we
but
had to
like
like we did.
when COVID hit, we all kind of a lot of us had like a lost month or 6 weeks of transitioning our entire life onto the internet.
Right. Right. I was like, no problem. I'll just be teaching online. And in the midst of this, I'm just going to also redo my entire conference online too. So it was actually really good. It actually was really good because I actually have a background in educational technology and online teaching. So I actually was able to use my skills in ways I never thought I would ever have to use my skills. Um, so it was actually really good. So, and then once we kind of kind of really showcased ourselves with this online conference called Nervous System for Nervous Times on like the national board. We started really networking a lot more in the areas that people have been asking for us to network. People were asking for us to do online stuff for like 3 years before COVID. So like it was just us being like, all right, do we really want to do that? We kind of were like, we had some cold feet
You
about
got the
it. And
ultimate
so
nudge.
we got the ultimate nudge. And I was like, I just don't want to go there. Like, I don't have to. And then it was really good though. It was great. Like we really connected like with Addie, and we connected to a lot of people, out that Victoria had really connected with when they had got done some work in Los Angeles, and we really got to cement some of those connections that they had made when they were doing work out there. So that was really cool. And that was like with Sari, Addie, and Hala. And so Victoria had done a lot of prep work for that. And then we were able to really kind of cement ourselves with this online platform that I built, that part of it. And so anyway, so it ended up being really cool. And we kind of, and from there, we've really just transitioned it to stay online. And, we've started doing so our networking meetings are now online. All of our things are online, and it's just way more manageable actually. So thanks, COVID. We're able to connect to more people. A lot of more people are just able to get the resources that they need, and people like Addie were able to connect and do stuff with Addie, which is really cool. So it was good. The universe was like totally like, you're doing it.
I'm so glad we got connected, and that that's really awesome. And I'm learning a lot from you, and even in this conversation. So thank you so much
Yeah,
for taking the time today to record this and answer so many questions and go through that chart point by point.
yeah,
Do you want to
yeah.
tell people how
I
they
like.
can follow you or follow Integrate or find your yin classes online?
Yeah, so integrate is at, so if you're on Instagram, it is at integrate_network. I realize not everyone is an Instagrammer. And so we do have an email list too. Usually get, I'm not gonna lie, you get usually what is we posted on integrate. Like on the we do. Like I try
It's
to be
like,
very honest about that.
but it's Instagram without the scrolling.
Yeah, it's Instagram without the scroll. I literally take the highlight reel of everything we did for a week, and I'm like, here's the highlight reel of what we did. Ta-da! And so so people really like it though. There are people that really do like that.
That makes
So,
sense.
um, so no shock, our email is literally what we post on Instagram and maybe any other like newsletter stuff or any events coming up. So it's like our emailed Instagram. And so if you don't like that, you can get a highlight reel. And then you can go on our website at let'sintegrate.org, and we have all of our websites and what we're about, our mojo, our mission, our list is on there, our provider list is on there, which includes Addie, and all the people from all over the world that you can contact with. And that's what's been really cool about Integrate, is like we were really able to really harness people have been asking for years, how can I get this in my area? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, I don't know. I can't think about it right now. And which is usually like a marker, which is like my own thing. I usually stall things for a while. I'm like the queen of stalling with things that I need to merge in. And so it was really great. So now we have a lot of people from all over the world, Australia, New Zealand, lots of states, several people in Europe, that we are in contact with, that we can help connect to other people that kind of work from this framework of inclusivity and trauma informed frameworks. So yeah,
So awesome. And you have a podcast too called the Restorative Pulse. So I encourage
I
people
do.
to go listen to that, and they'll hear many of the Integrate providers on there.
I can totally do that. Totally do that. So yeah, so you can go listen to Integrate Providers, be guest host and guest. So cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Julie, and thank you for all you do and your leadership and your teaching.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This is a great conversation.
My pleasure. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.